to Menopause Taylor. This is the YouTube channel that is really a classroom. I refer to it as Menopause University, and graduates from this university have an education that enables them to make the rest of their life the best of their life. Of course, that's only possible if you get the whole education, and the only way to get the whole education is to start at video number 1 and watch them all in order. If you don't do that, you should either buy my book or buy the entire education as webinars 1 through 15, or buy the entire education on DVD, or schedule a consultation with me. And you can do all of those things at menopausetaylor.me. Whatever you do, don't sabotage your education by jumping around all willy-nilly in the order of these videos. If you do that, you won't know anything well enough to actually use the information. I do everything in units, just like in school. And we are currently nearing the end of the unit on osteoporosis. I've already taught you everything you need to know about osteoporosis itself, everything you need to know about the medical guidelines for diagnostic testing and treatment, and all the management options for preventing or treating bone loss. In individual videos for each, I have presented every option in every category, including diet, lifestyle, vitamins, minerals, herbs, hormonal medications, and non-hormonal medications. Now, I want to take the opportunity to address all the options together. And the reason I want to do that is to make absolutely sure you understand that all options for managing osteoporosis do not provide the same benefits or accomplish the same goals. You see, it's great that you have a huge smorgasbord of options for managing osteoporosis and preventing fractures, but if you don't know how to utilize the ones that will accomplish your specific goals, you could be in for a big surprise. That's why you definitely need to watch this video. The last thing you want is to spend years doing something to prevent osteoporosis, only to fracture your spine or hip simply because you weren't accomplishing what you thought you were accomplishing. So I have specified the purpose of each option in the previous individual videos that were dedicated to each option category. But here, you're going to get a comparative overview. So first, I'll go through and designate the limitations of each option, and then I'll give you some typical scenarios for each. Now, in the previous videos, I've shown you the T-score scale for bone density, and I've placed each option where it belongs in terms of whether it is utilized for purposes of prevention, intervention, or fixing. Here's that scale again. In this video, I'm going to restructure that information in the form of a chart. You know, for some people, simple charts are easier to use than complex scales with a bunch of things written all over them. I guess you could think of the categories of prevention, intervention, and fixing as lanes. They're like the lanes on a highway. In other words, depending on which lane you take, you can end up in a different situation. So we have 3 lanes. Lane 1 is for people who do not have any bone loss. They have a T-score of 0 or above. All they need to do is prevent bone loss. So they can use options that only serve the purpose of preventing bone loss when your bone is normal. These people are zipping around quickly. They've got nothing to slow them down. And that's because they have no problem to which they need to attend. I like to think of this as the fast lane. Lane 1 is the fast lane. Lane 2 is for people who have some bone loss, but not enough to warrant a diagnosis of osteoporosis. They have osteopenia. Their T-score is between negative 0.1 and negative 2.4. They need more than just prevention. They need intervention. They need to get busy replacing bone, but they aren't in a state of emergency yet. They need to do something to replace their bone loss, but they have a little more leeway than they'd have if they had full-blown osteoporosis. So this is the medium speed lane. Lane 3 is for people who have so much bone loss that they have full-blown osteoporosis. Their T-score is below negative 2.5. They are in need of immediate, rapid treatment to restore a whole lot of bone. They need fast treatment because they will not be able to move at all without it. So, this is the very slow lane. So, if I were to put all the treatment options into these 3 lanes and make a chart of which ones belong in which lane, it would look like this. The chart is really simple. You have 3 columns or lanes. Lane 1 is for prevention, and it includes a lot of options. Lane 2 is for intervention, and it has about half the number of options that were available for prevention. Lane 3 is for fixin', with only 4 options. The point of this chart is to ensure that you use options that are in your lane. That's the only way you will succeed in doing whatever you need to do in terms of your bone density situation. If you don't have any bone loss, as proven by a DEXA bone density scan, then the options in lane 1 for prevention will serve you well. If you do have bone loss and are in the osteopenia range, then the options in lane 2 will serve you well. And if you have so much bone loss that you have full-blown osteoporosis, the only options that will serve your needs are those in lane 3 for fixin'. But if you're in lanes 2 or 3, and you use only the options in lane 1, you could be in real trouble. You'll find yourself completely derailed and in the very situation you had hoped to avoid. So let me utilize the chart and give you some scenarios of successful and unsuccessful management of osteoporosis. And I'll use these 3 lanes too. The key is to keep everything in the proper lane. If you don't, you'll end up derailed and have a wreck, otherwise known as a fracture of your spine or hip, that lands you in a nursing home. So, let's say you're 5 years post-menopause. That means your estrogen disappeared 5 years ago, but you went to Menopause University and learned everything about avoiding bone loss, and you started taking HRT during perimenopause. And you've already gotten your first bone density scan, even though you had to pay for it yourself. It showed that your bone density was that of a 30-year-old. Your T-score was positive 1. So you decided that all you need to do to prevent bone loss is continue taking HRT along with calcium and vitamin D and do weight-bearing, resistance, balance, flexibility, and core stability exercises. And you were due for another bone density test this year. So this is an example of someone who is in lane 1. All she needs is prevention, and she is utilizing the management options in lane 1 that accomplish the goal of prevention. So on the chart, I've highlighted them in red with her lane highlighted in green. So she has stayed in her lane, and she ends up in the land of nirvana at the end of the road. Now, let's change the circumstances a bit for scenario 2. let's say you're 5 years postmenopause, and that means your estrogen disappeared 5 years ago, but you've had no symptoms of menopause. You think of yourself as lucky, and your attitude is, why should I take hormone replacement if I feel fine? You're actually afraid to take estrogen. Your friend, the hairstylist, told you it would kill you. You did get a bone density test, but only because your menopause tailor told you to. And it did show moderate osteopenia. But your doctor said it was normal for your age. So you've decided to take calcium and vitamin D instead of taking estrogen. And to be really protected, you're doing your weight-bearing, resistance, balance, flexibility, and core stability exercises with your friend in scenario 1. You assume you can accomplish without estrogen the same thing she's accomplishing with estrogen. So when your estrogen disappeared, your bones started disappearing too. But you haven't had any symptoms from that either. This is an example of someone who is not in lane 1, but who is utilizing the management options only for lane 1. She has bone loss, which means she needs intervention. But instead, she is only using options that are for prevention. On the chart, her options are highlighted in red with her lane highlighted in green. She should be using options in lanes 2 or 3, but she hasn't stayed in her lane. She's switched to lane 1, and that will never end well. Instead of staying in her lane, she has switched lanes, so she crashes into a wall and sustains multiple fractures. Okay, for scenario 3, let's say you have a strong family history of osteoporosis. You were anorexic all during your high school and college years, and you have hypothyroidism, all of which increase your risk of osteoporosis. Your biggest fear is osteoporosis because your mom ended up in a nursing home after fracturing her spine at age 60. So you get a bone density test at age 51, and it reveals that you already have osteopenia. But you don't want to take HRT because you think it will cause weight gain, even though your gynecologist assures you that it won't. So you decide to use a SERM, which is a non-hormonal medication, to prevent further bone loss and to replace the bone you've already lost. So you take your SERM and you get another bone density test a year later. Now this scenario involves someone who is in lane 2. This person is using a management option that serves the purpose of intervention and fixing. And so here's our chart with the options highlighted in red and her lane highlighted in green. So she's staying in lane 2. And since she stays in her lane, she reaches the end of the road where she finds Nirvana land. Okay, now for scenario 4. You're a 65-year-old woman who has just had her first bone density test. And you had never even heard of a bone density test until your gynecologist said, it's time to get your bone density test. You were sure it would show completely normal results because you walk your dog every day and you never fail to take your calcium and vitamin D. You consider yourself fairly well educated in medical matters. I mean, you aren't in the profession or anything like that, but you listen to your girlfriends and you pay close attention to the television commercials that claim calcium prevents osteoporosis. So you are absolutely shocked when your bone density test reveals severe osteoporosis. So severe that your doctor recommends starting on a medication for treating osteoporosis right away. She says that she will first use a medication that she will administer herself, but after that, you'll be taking one or another kind of medication for osteoporosis for good. She says that your insurance will cover it because you definitely qualify as eligible for treatment based on both the guidelines and your insurance rules. And she's surprised you haven't already fractured your spine or hip with your low T-score. So you start taking a non-hormonal medication for treating osteoporosis. Here we have someone who was obviously in the wrong lane before her bone density test. She was way over here in lane 1, but she belongs in lane 3. So here's the chart with the options that she was using before she found out she had osteoporosis highlighted in red, and her actual lane highlighted in green. But when she discovered that she had severe osteoporosis, she switched lanes to the proper lane and started taking a medication that could actually replace her lost bone. So here's the chart again, with that revealed. Of course, she can and should continue walking and taking calcium and vitamin D, but those things alone would never have been enough. So, since she's changed lanes, if she continues taking medication, now that she's on the right track, she will eventually reach Nirvana land. It will take a while, but she'll get there. Okay, now for scenario 5. In this scenario, you have happened upon several alternative providers on YouTube who say that progesterone is the way to go. They claim that progesterone is safe, whereas estrogen isn't. They recommend that you take progesterone instead of estrogen for both your perimenopause and your postmenopause. You buy it, both literally and figuratively. So, you start taking progesterone when your periods get wacky during early perimenopause. And when you start having all the other symptoms of postmenopause that indicate estrogen loss, you just continue taking progesterone all by itself. You actually feel horrible, but you can't bring yourself to listen to your body. Whenever you start thinking that maybe estrogen deficiency is the problem, you force yourself to stick with the progesterone. Osteoporosis is your greatest risk because you are a thin, white, blonde woman with rheumatoid arthritis and vitamin D deficiency. But you're convinced that progesterone is the panacea for menopause. After many years of taking progesterone only, you finally get your bone density test at age 65, and surprise, it shows full-blown osteoporosis. This scenario is just plain crazy. It's a person who has always been destined for lane 3, but has refused to be realistic about it. Here's the chart. Do you see progesterone anywhere on this chart? No, it has absolutely nothing to do with protecting your bones in any way. In fact, progesterone can cause bone loss. All your faith in progesterone has left you devoid of bone. You aren't even in a lane. You're just kind of driving aimlessly with no real direction at all. So you eventually just fall off the road and crash into the abyss down below. Now, I've used these scenarios to demonstrate that all options for prevention, intervention, and fixing of osteoporosis do not accomplish the same things. The key is to know what each one can and cannot accomplish. You have to stay in your lane. If you don't, you'll end up in a heap on the side of the road. Now, you should know that I didn't even have to make up these scenarios. I encounter women like all of these every single day. They're everywhere. They span the gamut of possibilities. There are many women who are under the illusion that they can use certain management options for a purpose other than its intended purpose. Don't kid yourself. This is no place for magical thinking. No matter how much you wish diet and exercise were all you need to replace bone loss, if you try to use them that way, you'll end up in a heap on the side of the road. No matter how much calcium and vitamin D you ingest, it will not be enough to treat osteoporosis. I want you to face the truth and deal with reality. Every day I encounter a woman who is changing lanes and heading off on the side of the road. My goal is to catch you before you crash. So the point of this chart and the T-score scale is to point that out. Print them out. Use them to choose management options that are appropriate for your situation. Stay in your lane. You can find both the chart and the T-score scale in the link just below the screen you're watching, or you can go to menopausetailor.me where you'll find all my charts and where you can schedule a consultation. Don't take chances on this. If you need my help, all you have to do is schedule a consultation. Think of it as hitchhiking. I'll pick you up and take you where you need to go. Okay, this is where I'll stop. Come back in a week to address bone quantity versus bone quality in greater detail than we have before. Subscribe. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Bye.